All right, everybody. So today on the podcast, we have Kolton Lukes. How you doing, man?
Great, man. How are you?
Good, good. Glad to get you on. So we connected, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago, and just showing your love for the channel and passion for fitness. We talked about working together on some of my videos. So if people watching have been enjoying the editing in more recent videos, we can thank Kolton for that, and I do definitely appreciate it. So thank you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of cool because I get to like zoom through your videos and see them first. So
Yeah, and also see how not smooth I sound at times when you're recording. It's weird, man. Like people, even like people who are good speakers, when you're recording yourself and like especially now I'm like, oh, like somebody else is editing this. Like you just start to like think of things like, oh, that sounded a little weird or something.
right,
You just kind of get in your head a little bit. So it's funny, but
the
I'll
one where you
assume.
dropped your computer was pretty hysterical.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was good.
yeah. I'll assume you judge me, then you just keep it to yourself. That's all fine. So you are obviously a coach yourself. You've been in the fitness game for a while. Before we get into that, we said that today's charity donation was going to go to a Cerebral Palsy Foundation. So can you just go into why you chose that?
Yeah, certainly. So obviously, cerebral palsy is kind of a big issue, and for some people, it affects them much greater than others. What people don't realize is like the people who are severely affected by cerebral palsy. Those are the individuals that most people are familiar with. They're stuck with some form of walking support for their entire life. They might not even have control of their lower extremities in any capacity. But there are individuals like myself who have a very minor form of cerebral palsy, and it doesn't inhibit my movement. Obviously, I work out. I'm super into fitness, so I can still basically do everything, but my movement is inhibited just slightly. So, and it affects me every day, and so it's something I'm very passionate about, and I see how it affects other people, and I'm thankful that I'm not, one of those more severe cases, but at the same time, I can relate in the sense of having that limiting factor per se. So
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I had no idea. Just like seeing your videos and stuff. So how is it affect? I mean, like you said, it's not that much, but how is it affecting you? Is it like how you're walking or what?
yeah, I mean, basically with everything. So when I was a kid, from the ages like 7 to probably about 13, 14, I had to wear a cast to kind of form my bones correctly because the musculature wasn't forming or wasn't as strong per se as my left leg. I had to wear a brace so that my bones wouldn't grow at kind of an angle, and so my foot wouldn't kind of torque inward. So I had to do that through my childhood. That was kind of like the biggest first experience I had. Following that, though, and still what really affects me today is the length discrepancy between my legs. So my left leg is actually the normal one per se. It's the one not affected. My right leg is the one affected. So it's actually almost an inch and a quarter shorter
Wow.
than my left. So especially when it comes to just walking, especially walking a lot, it can be something that would be very simple for a lot of people. But for me, that little imbalance can shift the hips, shift your spine, and you can get really sore really quick. And then relating it to the gym, obviously, leg day is a whole complex beast in itself.
Yeah.
I have to do a lot of isometric movements. I have to sometimes I'll raise my right foot on a platform to even out my hips for squatting movements. So it affects me in some capacity, almost in every point. So
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, I'm just thinking of when I've had like one shoe on and how annoying that could be to walk.
right, yeah,
So
that's how I would relate it. It's almost as if you have a full sole of a shoe underneath one foot and you're just kind of like gimping around. I'm
yeah.
really good at hiding it, and even if you look through my Instagram, you're not going to see many pictures where you're like, that leg is significantly smaller.
Yeah.
But it's something that's always kind of in my mind, and you could call it an insecurity for sure, because
Interesting.
obviously when you go on stage, and even as like a physique athlete, which is what I turned pro as, it's still like there. You're still like, my calf is smaller than my left
Right.
calf. They're gonna
Right.
notice.
Right. Yeah. Well, mine are just so small that if there was a discrepancy, you wouldn't notice it anyway. So.
Yeah, there you go.
So you mentioned before we started recording that you were up to 220 at one point. I'm assuming that was like an off season, but kind of what's like your competition history as far as what you bulk up to and what you cut down to?
Yeah, so when I first started competing, I've always been into lifting since I was 13 years old. I had this amazing coach who, in middle school, was a bodybuilder himself, and I mean like a full blown bodybuilder. This dude was probably close to, I was a kid, but close to 260, 270. I mean, he was massive. The whole town knew him as the town bodybuilder, and he coached all these strength and conditioning classes for my school. And so he kind of like mentored me. And since then, I've consistently have been lifting from the age of 13, whether it's on my own or in a class or in some kind of capacity. So lifting has always been a prerogative for me. Dieting never really took place up until I started competing. So I just kind of like, my mind was, hey, just eat as much as possible. So there was points in time where I would get up to, like 220 to 230, but it wouldn't be like a healthy 220, 230, like a almost borderline obese 220, 230. So,
wow. How tall are you?
6'2".
Okay, so you're pretty tall.
Yeah. So it was an interesting time. I thought, kind of like everyone does when they start, they're like, hey, you just got to eat a bunch of protein, get your mass building shakes in, and go to the gym and you'll be fine.
Sure.
So that's kind of what I did. And then I started to cut down. When I competed my first show, which was 2019, I was, I think, 176 on stage.
Okay.
Day of the show. And then I bulked back up to, I never got above 200 at that point. So I was like, I leveraged around, I was probably on average around 200 for most days, occasionally bumping up and down depending on like how many meals I'd have extra or whatever the case may be. But after that first show, I was super, super strict on my diets. I kind of developed this mindset where like, if you don't eat 6 meals a day and if you don't do this 100% to the plan, you're not going to advance. And so I always kept my calories pretty relative, kind of towards maintenance. I never really put on weight in a healthy manner. So I stayed relatively lean. And then just recently, I did another show, and that show I came in like 3 pounds heavier than the year before, 2019. So the show is 2020, same month in October. And I only put on like 2 pounds of stage weight. I was relatively similar as far as conditioning goes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I realized like, okay, I need to actually maybe eat a little bit more to promote some growth. When I say I would stay lean, like I would stay like under or at 10%, never more, never really less. But
and you were how old when you did your first competition?
I was 19.
So you're only what, like 21 now?
23.
23. Okay, maybe I did the math there. So you said 2019 was your first competition?
Yep. So it was October 2019. Maybe I'm doing the math wrong. It was 2018. I'm sorry. My first competition was 2018.
Gotcha. I mean, that's probably like it gives people an idea of what I feel like is kind of generally achievable in natural bodybuilding. Like, because you're taller than I realized. So, because like, I feel like the average height in the fitness industry is like 5'7" or something. So for you to be, 176 at 6'2" and like contest lean, I mean, that's a good physique, but it's not like this is just unattainable. I'd say that's like solid. And then, if you were to continue to compete naturally, you probably, maybe could have put on a couple more pounds from season to season. But you had, like you said, you had maybe 7 years of like lifting under your belt, and not, maybe all totally serious, but still lifting and progressing. So
lifting continuously. Yeah. And I think that's kind of a big misconception is a lot of the clients I get are like, hey, I just can't figure out why I'm making progress in the gym. And it's only been 6 months. And I'm like, listen, you have to realize that the people you're viewing are the exception. And that's, I think, missed in lots of, especially when you look at Instagram and you see all these people, I gained 40 pounds in 2 years. Listen, you're lucky to gain 5 in 2 years.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, at least after you're past that, beginner stage and everything.
Right.
So, yeah. And I think it's good to have, and also because like people can look at you and they can see, okay, this guy's got a good physique. So you don't have to be like and not to say that you're average, because you're pretty clearly above like what you see in like an average gym, but you can have a good physique and it just takes time. It's not something that's like immediate, or like you said, people on Instagram, you don't know what people are doing. So, and you did discuss at one point, I guess, somewhat related to the cerebral palsy, that you decided to no longer compete naturally, right?
Right.
And now are you in the NPC? Are you going to compete in the NPC?
I am in the NPC. So my last show was in the NPC.
Okay.
But yeah, related to the cerebral palsy, basically the diagnosis I received was that they think what cerebral palsy is, for those who don't know, is essentially when it can be from many things, but when you're in birth, at some point there's a lack of oxygen or blood supply, and a portion of your brain kind of dies off, for lack of a better term. And so that portion of your brain probably controls some component of your body. For my case, it was, my right leg. They also think that affected my pituitary and its ability to produce hormones. So through kind of my youth, I really struggled with that until I was finally prescribed with testosterone replacement therapy. So.
Cool. So is that something that you had considered? Because, if you saw my podcast with Pete Rubish, and, I kind of talk about a very common trend is, I would say, like, I started so young, kind of like you, I started like 12. So my timeline would be extended if I ever went that route. But like, it's okay, 6-7 years in, you've kind of gotten most of your natural progress. You could, eke out some more over the next 10 years. But a lot of times people don't really wait for that. And so then they start, and obviously they can make a lot more progress, or other people just say no, like if it's, and I've had clients who have done both who have said no, like, I have a 45-year-old client who's just on TRT. He's been on TRT for 15 years, zero interest in bumping it up or anything like that.
Right.
And then there's other people who say, well, I'm on TRT, but that allows me to kind of do a little bit here and there. And you don't really have to worry about shutdown at that point because you're already shut down. So
yeah, exactly. I would certainly agree with that. I think it provides a gateway, just similar to any other drug.
Yep.
And the mindset immediately, especially when you're in this industry, your mindset immediately goes to, okay, what can I leverage more from now, where I couldn't at before? Because you already know, okay, for me especially, I was like, okay, I'm out of the camp of the natural athlete. Now I'm entering to this realm, and I'm seeing the guys on stage, and I'm like, this is it's gonna be tricky, So it kind of gave me the ability to leverage other things to a point, though, which thankfully for me, because of my experience and the length of time for anyone who actually gets TRT, I'm not talking about goes to a sports clinic and just gets like 300 milligrams per week type stuff. I'm talking from an actual endocrinologist who will prescribe you maybe 120 milligrams depending on your body weight. It takes months. It's not a process that's like you just make a quick call and they send it to you. I had to go through almost over a year of Clomid monotherapy, which was miserable, and continually come back for blood work.
Did it ever get your testosterone high enough?
So that it would artificially bump my testosterone up. So initially, it would go from low 200s to upper 500s. So we'd be like, great, it worked. And usually that would be like a pill every day, which was at that time 40 milligrams every day of Clomid. And then we would switch to every other day and then every third day. I don't know why, but that was just their protocol. So the first month would be 40 milligrams every day. The second month, 40 milligrams every other day, and the third month, every third day. And every time my test levels would look great. My total, and the thing is and this is a whole rant I could go into, but they're only looking at total test levels. They're not looking at free testosterone, SHG, PG, anything. But anyways, they see that artificial number raised, so it goes up to like the upper 500s, and he's like, great, you're fixed, excellent. Then 3 months later, I come back, do more follow-up blood work, and I'm back down to the 200s. And at one point, like we were talking before this, I got down to below that. So I was only the 160s or 140s, I can't remember, total testosterone. And that kept reoccurring for, like I said, months and months and months. It got past a year, and at that point, we kind of just made the call. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of points there. I mean, one, people don't realize, like, so you can, and for your issue, right, you have to determine is it primary or secondary hypogonadism, right? And depending on the reason for it, some people, they might be able to do Clomid, Nolvadex, things like that, and get levels back to normal. But if you're just artificially boosting it, that doesn't, you're not going to stay on it for life, right? I mean, nobody would suggest saying, actually, I've seen some recommendations to stay on Clomid as like basically like a form of TRT, basically, or I guess you could say HRT. But I certainly wouldn't recommend that. I think that would be a mess. But in any case, so that's one point. But two, as far as like where you get it, and you're right, like there are these clinics all over the place. I mean, it's super easy to get. And I mean, ridiculous. I've talked to like some of these doctors, and like they're like legitimate doctors, but how they run this business and don't get closed down is amazing to me. There's a viewer who I like, and I've talked to quite a bit, and he's on TRT, and he was just emailing me about some records he took. He like had it tested, so he's on like legitimate TRT, but he ordered something from a reliable source, and it was supposed to be 200 milligrams of primobolan, and it was like 175 total of 5 different compounds, including tren, a little bit of primo, test, nandrolone, and equipoise, I think it was. And it's like, dude, like, first of all, like, why, if you're gonna fake it, like, why'd you have 5 different compounds? Like, I don't know, man. It's just crazy what's out there.
More expensive, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. So that, I mean, it's just crazy, like what's out there, and you know, all of that. But yeah, if you go, and like another doctor I talked to, again from like one of these clinics, and he was like, minimum he gives anybody is 200 milligrams. And I'm like, dude, like that's just not based in science at all. Like that's not replacement. Now there's going to be some people who, you know, for one reason or another need like a higher dose to get free testosterone in like ideal ranges, but it's a small, it's a small percentage. I mean, even a guy as big as John Meadows said that he was probably too aggressive going on 200 milligrams per week. And now he's still like 230 and he's on 100 milligrams a week.
Are you familiar with Mark Lobliner?
Yes.
So he goes through a clinic. Can't remember their name, but when I was originally looking into TRT, I was calling around to compare, you know, other places. I was looking at these clinics because I was curious. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with these clinics, because if you are going to leverage some sort of PED, I would prefer a person go through a clinic where it is actually at least somewhat standardized. You have the backing of a clinic and a compounding pharmacy to make you what you might be looking into. But, you know, they're prescribing like a standard dose of 300 milligrams per week. And then on top of that, they give you the ability to add, you know, nandrolone at 200 milligrams per week. They give you the ability to add growth hormone, Anavar, Anadrol. I mean, it's quite literally like, hey, here's the cycle. And you know, we're considering ourselves a pharmacy. So
yeah, it's kind of amazing, but I know they do it, which, like you said, I mean, at least you have somebody kind of backing you. I think also, once you go on TRT, what you said earlier, it's like one of the biggest reasons that there's a lot of reasons I don't recommend most people to, you know, go the enhanced route. But one of them is like, it's just not going to do that much unless you stay on, right? Yeah. I mean, yes, there are some people who will do a cycle, but I mean, I know a guy who's a competitive bodybuilder and he did a cycle and he was like, well, I'm just going to go off everything. And his levels were like 25 nanograms per deciliter afterwards, even like months afterwards. Right. And the reality is, like, I know so many people who, like, you would never guess were taking something, or once a year they did a cycle, because they just lose it. And the difference between that and being on TRT or cruising, even a low dose cruise, and then like spiking once in a while, dramatic difference.
It's insane.
Yeah.
And what people don't realize is that once you involve TRT, you start including it, even if it is in even if it's in like the middle of the reference range, physiological levels, you're maintaining that. So it's not like it dips after one night of no sleep or poor eating or going out and drinking. It will consistently be that number. There's no peaks, but there's no troughs as well. So that is in what I would consider enhanced already. You have that benefit as opposed to some people where, you know, you're in a contest prep and you're doing tons of cardio and you're in a calorie deficit, your testosterone levels will drop significantly, but that person will be able to maintain a balance.
Right. Yeah. I think it makes it even bigger. Like, I think if you're an off-season bodybuilder, because there was a guy I talked to who, I don't want to call him out, but like, I definitely disagree on how much he was saying TRT helps like tremendously. And I think if you're hypogonadal, sure. Yeah. But I think, let's say you're normal male, you wake up, your levels are 700. By the time you go to sleep, they're like half that, right? So is somebody who then takes TRT and actually has 700 like all day. Is that a huge difference? It will be a difference. This guy was saying like it's going to put on like 20 pounds of muscle. Like there's just no evidence that's that strong, but it could make a difference. But compared to a guy who's maybe like 400 in the morning and 200 at night, and now your 700 is all the time, your area under the curve there is dramatically different, right? And then obviously, like we were saying, I mean, what's stopping you from saying, hey, summer's coming up, 12-week cycle, like, you know, these are the things that add up. And these are then, and I'm sure you're not like this, but they are the guys who say, well, I barely do anything. It's like, you barely do anything, but you haven't realized you've been barely doing anything for 10 years. And you put on 5 pounds, you put on 3 pounds, and all of a sudden you're 25 pounds heavier than your normal, your natural limit, but you still consider yourself like basically natural, you know?
Right. So. It's terrible. And the problem with it too, is it's so, again, looking at those elite people from Instagram, those influencers, people see them as like, okay, they're definitely like using something. And when they say like, I'm not using that much, I think people begin to perceive that, you know, these things, these PEDs are the magic pill, in that they instantly will provide them a physique that is similar, if not the same as said influencer. Yeah. And the reality is that's just not true. I mean, you can see 3 out of 5 dudes in the gym are probably on something and you couldn't even tell. And that's the reality. It's not going to leverage that much growth as people would expect. And it's certainly not going to change your structure or your genetics to make you somebody who you aren't.
Yeah. Yeah. I just worked out with Paul Canoe recently, and he's just like a true genetic freak. And like in terms of muscle mass, yes, but not like, but it's largely structural. I mean, this guy literally, like, we just randomly met at the gym one day, and this guy literally, I would not at all be surprised if he was a future Mr. Olympia Classic Physique champion. Do you know who I'm referring to?
Yeah, I think I've seen pictures of him.
Yeah, I mean, his structure is ridiculous. I mean, he literally could be like a Breon Ainsley kind of guy.
Right.
And and there was a picture of him from his first year of lifting he showed me. And I was like, I will never look this good, you know?
Exactly.
It's not like and like both genetics and for people who use gear, like, just to be clear, like, I'm saying these things just to point it out. I don't care at all if somebody uses it. If I wasn't such a hypochondriac, I'd use it too. You know, I just freak out about health stuff. But like, it's fine. And I think if anything, like I can relate to it because it adds a whole new avenue of progress. And like, even like, if you're a scientific thinker of like, well, okay, let's experiment with this. We can add this. I mean, I guess I don't want to say his name, but somebody I've had on the podcast a number of times who's very clearly enhanced, but like very intelligent. And he basically just sorts this stuff out himself, and he gets the blood work and he does this stuff. And if it wasn't for the health ramifications, I think it's actually kind of like a cool thing to experiment with, in the same way that a lot of naturals like to try a bunch of supplements or try nutrition tactics and things like that.
Yeah, I think everyone's kind of is appealed to the experimental side of things for sure. And even myself, yeah, it's definitely fun to review the research and kind of look into things and then kind of come to your own conclusions and decide to do something based off your own intuition per se.
Yeah.
I could see why that would be appealing for a lot of people, especially. But like you, I am an extreme. I get one bad blood marker, and it might not even be something that serious. Like my ALT might be risen 2 points past the norm.
Right.
I need to do something about this, like right now. And I will change my entire diet that day. I'll completely go to the supplement store, buy everything I need that's associated with lowering this marker, and go absolutely crazy with it. So I'm very similar in that sense.
Yeah. Well, no, it's good, man. I mean, it's definitely better to be like that than, you know, like Boston Boy types or something. Not, you know, no hate on Boston. I mean, I like that he's like brutally honest about what he does, but like, it's very hard for me to relate to somebody who's got like a 200 over 120 blood pressure. And it's just like, you know.
Exactly. I love Boston. I love him because he's so, he's open, but he's also like, he just doesn't care. He'll tell you, and it doesn't matter to him. He doesn't take any sort of offense to what he says and what people say back.
Yeah.
And he will give his true feedback. And it's almost like one of the people in the industry that, you know, you can count on that he's not going to tell you like a falsified number. Like if this person took 3 grams, he's going to tell you he took 3 grams of TRT.
Right.
And that's what it took. But in that same sense, yeah, I love the guy, and it's fun to listen to him, and he's funny and he's super relatable. But it's like, man, I cringe when I hear stuff like that. When you have that high of blood pressure just walking around daily, you know, it's like how, like, my mind would just explode. I couldn't deal with it.
It's amazing to see. I just kind of like wonder what goes into the psychology of somebody like that. Cause I mean, for people who don't know, I mean, he's done like obscene amounts of anabolics. I mean, I think in like the 4 or 5 gram range.
He was saying he did like 7 cc's a day or something like that. I can't remember, but that's
not even counting whatever growth hormone and insulin he's doing. So I mean, I don't know if I haven't seen an update in a little while. He was in like stage 3 or 4, like kidney failure or something like that. So obviously he's kind of paying the price, which is a shame. He's got a family now, but he's putting it out there. But yeah, I think he's my age. I think he's 28 or 29. Yeah, so he's not an old guy at all, but his experience in the industry and the, you know, like pro bodybuilding scene is pretty vast at this point, just from his own experimentation.
Right. He's a very cool. You're familiar with Leo and Longevity?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that guy too. I follow all his podcasts. I listen to like literally every minute of them. I really enjoy his content. 1, because it's educational, but 2, because he provides insight that not many people have. And obviously Boston is on with him too on their podcasts. And I think he talks about it a lot, and he realizes like, hey, this was his fault, like 100%.
Right.
But he mentions like how it's kind of getting better. And then like the next sentence he'll talk about like putting 4 cc's of gear in him like the next day. And it's like,
yeah, that's
at one point it's just,
is it like a mental illness? I don't know. I mean, it sounds like it's a
I can certainly get it. I mean, you know what this is like too. Like, what if you really analyze the gym, like what benefit do we get from it? When you look at it kind of neutrally, there's not a whole lot that we gain besides an appearance that we want, or maybe some kind of ego that we'd like to be perceived with.
Sure.
But outside of that, there's not much to it. It's just the progression that you get, whether that's strength or muscle or just a certain way that you look, can become so addicting. Yeah, and it's crazy. And Vigor Steve, you know, he went through that whole thing with his non-alcoholic fatty liver disease,
right,
which is also super inspirational, and how he fasted, got off everything, and lost a ton of weight. Still looked great, still does, but having that mental capacity to just put yourself through that and watch yourself morph in the mirror, that takes real strength.
Yeah, I mean, because like, let's be honest, like as much as we extol the health benefits of this endeavor, it's largely an ego aesthetic driven practice, right? I mean, that's why I got into it, and now it's probably more for health and longevity than anything for me. But I still care about how I look for sure. Yeah. And it's very hard to see that go away, which is actually part of the reason that I would not want to, you know, blast to the moon, because the concern is like, I already know that like as I age, it's going to be hard for me to see myself get smaller. But these guys, like I respect a guy like Dorian Yates, who seems to have just like fully accepted a completely different life. And just being like, and of course, when you're that big, how can you not? But like Ronnie Coleman clearly has a hard time with it, and he's still going through injury after injury after injury.
Still leg pressing with no bones in his back practically.
Right. It's like I would have such a hard time regressing, because like a lot of other areas, I mean, obviously in most areas of life, you're eventually gonna, you know, kind of trend off, but like financially you can grow forever. I have a friend who's like just really into style, and you can like, you know, continue that and be a stylish grandpa. Like there's a lot of things that you can continue to progress on, but like physical endeavors, and especially like lifting, I mean, you can do it for the whole life, but that drop off, I think psychologically is really tough. And Boston's experiencing that to a large degree at 28 years old, you know?
Yeah, it's gotta be tough. And it's the weirdest thing, because it's like, you know, I relate this to, it's almost like the one thing in life that a lot of people know what needs to be done to become successful. Whereas maybe to become financially successful, or to build a family or build a business, it's not such a straight and narrow path. And so it's almost like this is the one thing where you get almost immediate results. I mean, you're in a deficit for 3 weeks, you're going to see results. But two, you get the feedback constantly from people talking to you, from the pictures you see in the mirror. And it's like you can correlate with what you're doing and what kind of success it's bringing. But when a lot of the times when you relate that to other things, like business or like finances, it's not as much of an instant gratification, and it's not as much of a clear path. There's not like, I'm sure there is like online coaches for like businesses and stuff like that.
There's definitely, yeah.
They, you know, how much of those are scams and whatever, but it's not as such of a straight path, and it's certainly not as visible. The waters are a little bit more murky in that sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, and like mentorship is important too. Like, I think sometimes I take for granted, like my dad was like a really good influence on me financially. You know, like I had like a Roth IRA when I was like 18 or 7, like very young. I was investing in stocks when I was like 14, like, you know, but I had somebody who gave me that guidance. And so like, I'll see people who are like 30 and like have no idea what they're doing financially. I'm like, oh, wow. Like you just didn't have that. But like, you know, like lifting wise, I mean, there's so much nonsense out there. So I think I agree with you that people understand, like there's an amount of effort to it. There's, you know, most people understand exercise more, eat less, kind of like as a general thing. But there's definitely still a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication out there as like far as what to do, because truly, like, and we probably don't even realize that we take it for granted at times. But like, if you just talk to like the average person who says like what diet they're doing, or like I have a patient today, well, I'm about to do like a 3-day cleanse, and like, you know, obviously I'm not about to spend 20 minutes talking to them about like why this is, you know, but like that's still a normal belief in people, you know. So there's a lot of miscommunication, which is obviously where you and myself and other people who try to get evidence-based stuff out there, but it's tough. I don't know. I feel like it's a losing battle.
I had a gentleman, I always get these funky DMs from people who are like, hey man, can you just like give me a piece of advice? And I'm always willing to help people for sure. Like, even if it's a quick message back, I'm always happy to. But you know, he was fairly obese, to be nice. And he's like, well, you know, I'm starting to do walks every day. And I'm like, hey, that's great, man. Like I encourage moving in any capacity, and walking is probably the easiest method of that. But he was like, yeah, I'm taking 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar and I just haven't seen any weight loss. I'm like, oh man, that's those things aren't correlated. Like, right. Sensitivity, but that's not going to do it for you, man. I'm sorry. It's tough because you get all these, you know, men's health articles, and people read these things and they take it as the truth. They see Mark Wahlberg's workout; he's eating 10 meals a day and working some ridiculous amount of workouts in twice a day and stuff. And it's like, that's not reality. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if you watched the whole thing, but you did make the thumbnail for the Tom Brady one I have coming out this weekend.
Yeah, that was really good.
So for people interested, look out this weekend for me destroying Tom Brady. I said in there, I was like, I just have forgotten almost, like, you know, we surround ourselves with like-minded individuals, and obviously, I mean, we see plenty of the BS out there, but like you do, like reading this book, I was like, oh wow, like this stuff is still out there, and like there's even worse stuff out there, and it's like you just forget, like, oh yeah, people can just say whatever they want and like that it will work. And it's a little disheartening, because I know people will say, oh, it's like almost like a survival of the fittest, or like, you know, it's what's the like stupidity tax and things like that, that they'll figure it out. But it's like, dude, like you don't know unless you've really been doing this for a long time. I love Greg Nuckols had a quote, and it was something along the lines of like, people are very good at knowing when somebody knows more than them about a topic, but when it comes to like 2 people who know more than them, it's hard for them to know which of those 2 know more. And I did a horrible job just repeating that quote, but like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, this person and this person, they're both NASA scientists, they know way more, but if they're debating, I don't know which one's right. And you know, most people might hear these 2 people who, you know, you don't know if like Mike Isertel debating, what was it, like Greg Doucette, right? Maybe one of them had way better points, but if you're new, you're like, I'm just hearing these 2 guys who both are way more jacked than I'll ever be arguing, right? So it's confusing.
It sucks too, because we have all these, I mean, immaculate people who are exercise physiologists. They put a ton of evidence-based stuff out there, and they really care about educating. I mean, they truly do care, and it's not just for money, and you can see that it's evident. But then you see a guy who has an amazing physique, or a girl, and immediately it's like their opinion almost matters more to the general population.
Oh, sure.
It's strange, but maybe they see something in their physique and that's why they're more qualified. I think that happens a lot, truthfully.
Yeah, and I've said this on other podcasts, but I don't see that going away,
Mhm.
I mean, because to an extent it does make sense. Like to us, we're like, oh, we know it's like so genetic, right? Like, would you take financial advice from somebody who inherited $10 million or who grew their, $100,000 to like $5 million? It's like, yeah, the latter person has less money, but like you got to see that. But most people would just think, I think with finances, probably more people know not to just look at like, oh, rich, they know what they're doing.
Right.
But I think when it comes to physiques and sports, I mean, if you just polled 100 people and you showed a picture of like Greg Doucette
Yeah.
and Brad Loomis, right?
Mhm.
And said, who knows more? Or even Eric Helms, let's say like Eric Helms
Yeah.
doesn't look nearly as impressive as Greg Doucette, right? People would just assume Greg Doucette, right? And I'm not saying he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like I think the guy's fine, whatever. but um, but obviously Eric Helms is like from a knowledge standpoint in this area, like top of the top.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes sense. Like I get where they're coming from. Like, well, why does he look like that then? And I don't really see that ever going away. That you're gonna like, mass inform millions and millions or like billion people that's the way. I think it makes sense that like, oh, they look how I want to look. They probably know. So
Yeah.
that's where we come in and we slowly peck away with our couple thousand views here and
Yeah.
there. And hey, but it is what it is.
Right, exactly. It's interesting. And, not to discredit people like Greg Doucette and stuff, because obviously those people have some form of experience in the trenches. Like they know to some capacity what they're doing, whether it's just their trial and error or what. But the people that don't get recognized are the ones who have the work in the trenches, and they also are the experts in their actual field. They know what they're talking about. And it's interesting because a lot of the people are appealed to individuals who just look the part. So
Yeah, yeah. And I saw, I know we were talking about Boston a bit. I saw he and Dante. I don't know if I like too much of like the drama that goes on, but I know Boston and Dante had some like back and forth arguments or something. And it's really funny because I've seen you post about Dante.
yeah,
I don't know, was he like a significant influence for you at all?
yeah, I love the guy. I think he has a lot of maybe not the best knowledge when it comes to supplements and stuff. He knows like what does what, but he doesn't understand the mechanisms behind those things necessarily. He won't explain why they work to you, but he does point out things in the industry like supplements, like training methodologies, like just the craziest stuff you wouldn't even think about, and they turn out to be right. That's why I call him the Yoda of bodybuilding.
Yeah. Yeah, he's an interesting guy for sure because he's been around for a while. I mean, he was writing, I don't know if you've seen his document Cycles for Pennies.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Or Cycling for Pennies. But yeah, he's, I don't know, 20 plus years old at this point.
Right.
And it's like people really dislike him in DC or they like love him. Like it's like a DC Dante cult. And it's really interesting to see because like I mean, I think his methods are good and he's produced like some like crazy physiques. I'm not sure where the like total fanboyism from one or the other comes. I've seen him say things that I just totally disagreed with, and I've seen him say a lot of things that I like really agree with. And unfortunately, he doesn't do podcasts as far as I think he's even turned down like some of his own friends for podcasts. But it's a shame because I think he would be an interesting person to like expose to the new generation, and like people, I think he had a really good influence on people from maybe like 2000 to 2010. And now he's still there, but I'm actually almost surprised that you've heard about him because I don't think there's that many guys who were in their like late teens or early 20s who know Dante. He's just not out there so much,
And now it's interesting too because I think he's definitely shifted his focus on more of health-based things. He's trying to fix bodybuilders rather than, he's still trying to improve them and show useful techniques for exercise and, mindful usage of things. But it seems like, at least on his Instagram page, he's really concerned with people's health. And almost every other post is like a post about organ health or what supplements you should be taking or something about overall wellness, I guess. which is
Yeah,
kind of,
which I'm glad he puts that out there because
yeah,
it's a shame like that really wasn't like I do kind of miss the days of like seeing like Rich Piana and everything like that. Like
right.
he was just an entertaining guy. But you know, when I started learning about, you know, so for people who don't know, like, you know, I was always just totally engrossed in natural bodybuilding. And like before I like started really becoming like obsessed with health, you know, I would say always, I considered going that route for a period of time.
Mhm.
I just assumed I'd be like, I remember reading people say like the passion was invigorated and reignited and all of that. And I just thought about it. So, I mean, I researched it a lot and I read about it a lot. But even then, there were forums where people would just talk about like they would ignore the health aspects and they just said, oh, well, everybody does this, and this being like multiple grams of gear and stuff like that. And that was like when I was probably about your age. So like, you know, I was maybe 22 or so. So to think of like how much that's changed in just like 5 or 6 years. And now like you have people on Instagram like Dante, there's a guy, Dean St. Mars, I think is his
Yep.
name.
Insane Martin. Yeah.
Yeah, and like people who are like this, like really putting out like stuff out there, and like so. Again, I'm not an advocate for going that route, but if you do it, there's so much more knowledge like readily available. You don't have to like I read like textbooks on it, like literally like endocrinology textbooks
Yeah.
and like Will Lewland's, if I'm even saying that right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've like read his whole textbook, and that's what was available. And luckily, I'm somebody who actually likes to like get into the details. But
Mhm.
like the average, you know, gym bro is not going to read a
Right.
textbook. They're going to say, "Well, hey, bro, what do you take? Okay, I'll take that. Let me go to wherever I can get it." So at least it's more out there now.
Yeah, and that's thanks to people like Leo. And even though Boston's like he talks about how much stuff he uses, he also makes it very clear like his clients are very conscious of how much they use. And people like that who are very public about their usage, it's good to know, because otherwise you're listening to these forums and you know these people without any sort of historical evidence behind what they're saying make these huge claims, and 18-year-old kids, 17, 16-year-old kids get on these forums because there's no limit to who can enter them
Sure.
and are hearing this stuff firsthand. And it's like, no, man. And then you got all these 15-year-olds and these 16-year-olds on TikTok getting on SARMs, and it's
Yeah.
like you're
Oh,
so fragile at that age, man. And your brain hasn't even fully developed. Your endocrine system is still starting to work as it normally should, and now you're just throwing a wrench in all the gears. And it's scary because if you're not public about it, and that's why personally, you know, I think all this stuff should be legalized generally, because it would allow for at least some education in the process. Whereas now you have those 15 and those 16-year-olds using these harmful substances without the knowledge of them even being harmful. They just see them as a thing to take to get a little bit more results. It's kind of sad.
yeah. Not to mention like going back to not knowing what you're getting. Like there's stuff that's legal that can still be totally. I mean, there was what was that product? There was thing like there was like Halidrol and Superdrol and all
Yeah.
that stuff. And I would be shocked if the SARMs that like kids are buying are
Well,
100% what they're saying on the label. Like there's just no way.
I know for a fact that a couple of my clients have gotten SARMs that turned out to be, when tested, D-ball or even Winstrol. And
Sure.
so like even then you don't know, you don't know. And it's just like it's a dangerous territory because they're experimental compounds that somehow get a loophole to be sold. And it's terrible because I mean, even a 15-year-old could go on with mom's credit card and buy Rad 140 and do a 8-week cycle of it, and
Yeah.
it's
It's
scary.
crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So I would say the majority of the people who I coach are natural. I've got a couple who are on TRT, and then I've got like one or two who are enhanced. And you know, like I said, I don't care. I just want to know about it when I coach
Right.
them. You obviously coach as well. Do you have a mix, or do you have mostly natural trainees?
Yeah, I have a mix. A lot of my, so I just really openly started coaching, making it obvious. I used to just help people here and then, and they got some really good results. And obviously, like I'm very evidence based. I do a lot of research and I look into the mechanisms of action. I don't just look at kind of the face value studies of like, this had this effect. Like I want to know why it had that effect and what's causing that effect. So I know a lot about that stuff. So I like the enhanced athlete, to be honest, because it is a little bit more, it's more entertaining per se, because there's more change and there's more variables, and that makes it fun for me. Because like we said, experimenting, not that I experiment with my clients, but having that ability to add variables to a program and see the changes is really fun. That's what makes progress cool. But I train mostly natural athletes, to be honest, because even just lifestyle, what I would quote as lifestyle people who are interested in losing weight, that's the bulk of my clients.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's just more of them, right?
Yeah, they just people need help like that, and it's great they reach out, because like we were just talking about, they likely don't know what a calorie deficit looks like, and if they're following Men's Health, they're going to think chicken, broccoli, and rice, and they're going to have a ton of micronutrient deficiencies, and not have enough fats in their diets, and just be a mess. They're going to spike their cortisol, they're going to drop in testosterone, women are going to become estrogen dominant. So many problems. So it's good that they're reaching out to us, and I don't mind. Like I like, change is great, and weight loss, often you see a lot more change than weight gain. So
yeah, I think it could be hard to respond to like all DMs at times, but I almost always will at least respond. And those are like the ones that I think you can make the most impact. Like I like the kind of like ethereal discussions and whatnot, and going into like the nitty gritty details of new studies. But the reality is, like, most of the help that we can give to people is going to come from people who are newer in this journey and have a lot of misunderstanding. And that's, I think, really rewarding.
Yeah, I find out, like, I post a ton of research on my Instagram page, and I do a ton of research. And I find when I build people's programs, and in my programs, I cite everything. So like if I say or make a recommendation, I'm going to cite like why I made that recommendation and my belief on it. And I think these people, they come to me and they're like, okay, cool. Like what kind of stuff we're going to do that's different? And I'm like, well, it's calorie deficit. We're going to add some cardio. Like it might not be the most sexy thing, but it's what works.
Right.
And that is like the practitioner side of things. Like there's variables that can be made to make it more efficient for sure. But in reality, like it's a pretty simple process.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on today. I really appreciate your help with the podcast up to this point.
Absolutely.
So you, like you just mentioned, you coach. Where can people find more of your stuff?
Yeah, you can find me. I'm primarily on Instagram. Kolton_red is my Instagram handle. Just follow me on there. I post a lot of research, and obviously I coach. I'm always looking for new athletes who are certainly motivated. I don't like the people who aren't motivated and miss check-ins and stuff. So if you're motivated, yeah, that's where you can find me. And I'm happy to help any way possible.
Awesome. Thanks again, man.
Yeah, appreciate it.